country is at war.
The forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations.
Tensions rising in northeast Africa as Ethiopia ploughs ahead building Africa's biggest dam on the continent's and the world's largest river, threatening the water security of all nations upstream.
In 2011, Ethiopia, using mainly Chinese-backed loans, begins construction on Africa's largest hydroelectric dam. High-level talks within the Egyptian government are held. Officials discuss destroying the dam. In an attempt to de-escalate, the international community organised several rounds of talks. These talks ultimately failed, and in 2019, Ethiopia began filling the dam without the consent of its two downstream neighbours. With tensions rising, the leaders of both Ethiopia and Egypt have upped the war rhetoric, placing the region on the brink of a conflict which could have global implications. The question is, why is it that the leaders of these nations are seemingly willing to risk going to war over the construction of a dam? The River Nile, the world's largest river. The Blue Nile, its largest section, flows from its source in Lake Tana into the Mediterranean Sea. Historically, the Nile has been the primary source of drinking water for the millions of people along its banks. But in the last half a century, there has been a damming boom on the Nile, turning the river into a gold mine for power generation. The culmination of this is the Gerd, Africa's soon-to-be largest dam, much to the disdain of its fellow Nile country, Egypt. Nile is the blood that runs through the heart of Egypt. It is the pillar on which Egypt's very existence sits upon. And without the Nile, there is no Egypt. 95% of the Egyptian population is located within a couple of miles of the river. Cairo, Egypt's biggest city and capital, is also located on the river banks. 96% of Egypt's land is arid desert. Just 3% of its land is suitable for agriculture. The majority of that is located on the banks of the Nile. Over 90% of Egypt's freshwater supply comes from the Nile. Without the Nile and its freshwater supply, there is no farmland to feed its population, nor drinking water to quench the thirst of its hundreds of millions of inhabitants. Any reduction in the flow of the Nile, caused by the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, threatens all of this. On average, 9 in 10 of the world's population have access to electricity. In Ethiopia, this is just 5 in 10. By 2025, the Ethiopian government wants 100% of its population to have access to electricity. It aims to achieve this by building Africa's largest dam. Despite suggestions that Ethiopia is unfairly exploiting the Nile by building the Gerd, its leaders argue that historically it is in fact Egypt and Sudan who have unfairly exploited the Nile. In 1959, following independence from the British Empire, Egypt and Sudan signed a treaty to allocate the water in the Nile. Despite being home to one of the sources of the Nile, Ethiopia was completely excluded from this treaty. With construction of the dam nearing completion, Ethiopia has a decision to make on how quickly it is going to fill the dam. Rapidly filling the dam would enable Ethiopia to meet its goal of not only providing electricity to 100% of its population, but also to become an energy exporter. But this option would escalate the already tense situation with Egypt and Sudan. Filling the dam too quickly could lead to measurable water shortages downstream that could impact food production in both Egypt and Sudan, especially if the initial filling occurs under drought conditions. Consequently, Egypt and Sudan have proposed a 15 to 20 year filling rate. Whilst this would appease its neighbours, it would also derail Ethiopia's plans for 100% electrification by 2025. The quicker Ethiopia fills the dam, the quicker it's going to reap the benefits. With ambitions to not only expand its agricultural industry by using the dam to help it irrigate hundreds of thousands of acres of land, the dam is also expected to generate a surplus of electricity. And the Ethiopian government has ambitions to become an energy exporter to its neighbours. The dam is at the heart of Ethiopia's plans for national revival, and it won't be stopped. With both Egypt and Ethiopia threatening war over the dam, a potential overspill leading to wider conflict in an already volatile region has led to concern amongst the international community. Both Egypt and Sudan have lobbied the UN Security Council and Arab League to get involved in resolving the dispute. In 2021, a traditional ally of both nations, Saudi Arabia, threw its support behind the claims of Egypt and Sudan, issuing a statement calling for the preservation of their legitimate water rights. Saudi Arabia has also called for the international community to intensify efforts to bring this crisis to an end. But with the world's major powers at odds over ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, there is no appetite to come together in order to mediate a resolution between Egypt and Ethiopia. With no conclusion in sight and Ethiopia ploughing ahead with filling the dam, conflict seems inevitable. The Nile represents Egypt's lifeline, and anything that jeopardises that lifeline threatens Egypt's very existence. With both Egypt and Ethiopia situated just a stone's throw away from the Suez Canal, the central artery for global trade, any conflict risks potentially overspilling and disrupting the global supply chain. The world's powers are watching. In what is already the world's most volatile region, any fighting risks acting as a potential spark for a wider regional or global conflict.